It's the biggest lying con of all time. And I think they're going to lose the trust immediately if they do this, because it was obvious. I question, especially when you think that most of the media is right-wing in this country, how they let the Labour Party get away with saying, well, we're not going to put up taxes, but we've made that clear in our manifesto. But when they're asked, well, what about corporation tax? What about inheritance? Oh, they wouldn't comment. And I think how they were allowed to be given such an easy ride, I think it's really about that everybody was so fed up with the Conservatives. They thought, well, you know, let them get away with it. But I think it's a dereliction of duty of the media to have allowed this not to be answered properly, because of course they're going to do that. And I think it's levelling down the country, not levelling up.
Keir Starmer has serious problems, and they are growing with alarming force. In fact, there are several of them, but the biggest one is that his own deputies are beginning to doubt his ability to lead the country. After his latest mistake in Brussels, they begin to leave his team, and this causes a real storm of discontent. Let's look at why the Labour Party is disintegrating from within. Let's start with his last mistake. This person doesn't seem to be able to find the right path, does he? Just when you think Labour can't fall any lower, Starmer surprises again. What caused such anger this time? He was caught flirting with Brussels about the so-called Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention. It sounds strange, but it's not just a harmless agreement. This could bring us back to EU rules. Haven't we spent years trying to get rid of this? This convention could seriously undermine Britain's trade and sovereignty.
Keir Starmer, I think, is doing a wonderful job of distracting from the main points on his own home ground. I've voted all parties for all colours, and I'm 50 years old. I can remember Thatcher. I can remember voting with regards to George Osborne and Cameron. But moreover, I will say one thing and one thing only. I'll let you ponder with this thought. I will never, ever vote Labour again, because all I can see from this party at the moment is distraction, distraction, distraction. And they will plough on and run this country into the ground.
If we join the EU, we may have to bring our food standards in line with European ones. This means that we will lose control over what will be sold on the shelves of our supermarkets. It's like Brexit never happened. Commissioner Maros Sefcovic let slip that Britain's membership in this PEM club is something we could consider. He even suggested that this could be part of a reset in relations with the UK. Starmer and his team are trying to pretend that there is nothing special about this. They claim that this will not violate any boundaries. But who are they trying to fool? All this smells like EU control. They seem to think that we all have short memories. Even the MPs who work with Starmer openly accuse him of this nonsense. They see through his game, and it tears the Labour Party apart from the inside. The idea with PEM may allow us to circumvent EU rules on the origin of goods. Sounds good, doesn't it? But there is always a catch in these deals with the EU.
Don't see that, and there isn't a case for rejoining the EU, and that's why I've been clear that because we've had a referendum, we've made a decision. If we've learned one thing, it's that the uncertainty of a referendum and everything that then follows is very, very bad for our economy. And our job, if we're privileged enough to come into government, will be to clear up the mess and rebuild our country. That means we have to make Brexit work. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the deal we've got is good enough. It was said to be, oven ready. It wasn't even half baked. So we've got to get a better deal, and we will get that better deal. You've seen some of the news this morning about Vauxhall and others and their worries about job losses. We've got to turn all that around, but it'll be a question of making Brexit work, not rejoining the EU. I think that we need to have a closer trading relationship to fix the problems that we've got.
In other words, they're going to take over again. And what is our government doing? As always, they just sit back, not showing the slightest desire to act. Cabinet Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds says they have no plans to sign the agreement right now, but they are continuing discussions. Starmer promised to respect the results of the Brexit vote, and now he's trying to please Brussels again. This is a real slap in the face to every voter in the country. This EU scandal has become a ticking time bomb for the Labour Party. The MPs are furious, the voters feel cheated, and Starmer looks increasingly confused and lost. He tries to please everyone, but it backfires on him. And you know what? The consequences of this are just beginning to show. Internal chaos in the Labour Party. What will happen next? We were just talking about Starmer. Confusion in the EU? hold on tight, because the Labour Party is losing several key figures and they are not going to leave quietly. It's not just a couple of worthless people throwing a tantrum. We are talking about high-profile members of the shadow cabinet, those who should lead the Labour Party in the next election, but instead of preparing to fight the Tories, they turn their backs on Starmer. In the last week alone, 3 senior Labour MPs have resigned from their positions on Starmer's team. This is a serious event, and they don't mince words when they leave. For example, Sam, who was the Shadow Minister of Transport until he was kicked out for participating in a picket. In his resignation letter, he wrote that Starmer's leadership had become an obstacle to the transformation that this country so desperately needs. Oh, it must hurt. And that's not all.
Last night, time and time again, Rishi Sunak was clobbering you over the head with that £2,000 tax line. It took you almost half an hour to call it garbage. What on earth took you so long?
What matters is the facts. None of our plans involve tax rises for working people, and I'll spell it out. No income tax rises, no national insurance, no VAT. But what emerged from last night, and this is a very important takeaway, is that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, with his back against the wall, desperately trying to defend their record in office, resorted to lies, and he knows he was lying. And I don't say that lightly. Lying about our plans, lying about waiting lists, and lying about votes. And therefore the choice at the election is even clearer now, which is to turn our back, turn a page on the lies, the division and the chaos of the last 14 years and rebuild the country.
Another member of Parliament called Starmer's position on the EU a betrayal. We've been talking about his proximity to the EU for a long time, but to hear someone from his own team call it betrayal is another level. But why now? What prompted these parliamentarians to cross the line? It is not difficult to compare the facts. Starmer actively supports Labour's Brexit policy, trying to please both supporters and opponents. Surprise, surprise, but in the end, he didn't please either of them. These resignations do not happen out of thin air. They are part of the general pattern of discontent that has been brewing in the Labour Party for several months now. MPs have long been unhappy with Starmer's leadership style. They say that he lacks clarity, that he is a style but not the essence. And now this scandal with the EU, which broke out in front of his eyes, seems to have become the last straw. They don't just disagree with his position on the EU or Brexit, they question his entire approach to leadership. Each resignation is accompanied by a harsh statement. It's like falling dominoes, each one hitting the next one. And with each departure of a member of Parliament, Starmer's position is getting weaker. This is a loss of authority, a loss of momentum, a loss of trust in his own leadership. So, what does this mean for the Labour Party? Things don't look good, do they? They are losing experienced MPs who could become key players in the election campaign, and every time one of these big names resigns, it's another blow to Starmer's credibility.
And my favourite is the rail reform. I'll tell you why I love this. Labour is planning to renationalise nearly all passenger services within 5 years. So when the tenure of operations are up for grabs, when contracts in the private sector have come to an end, it's going to come back under a national canopy. Now, the reason I find this so peculiar, let's say, for the Labour government, because they love a bit of renationalisation, don't they, is you couldn't do this if you were in the EU. Honestly, you couldn't. The EU have got its Rail Services Directive, which is making even the countries that maintained nationalised railways go in the opposite direction and sell out more and more services and lengths of track to the private sector to open up competition. It's against competition regulation. So this, dear Sir Keir Starmer, is you actually cashing in on a Brexit dividend. Put that in your pipe.
Starmer's position on Brexit has undergone more turns than a roller coaster ride, and this is shocking and perplexing. Do you remember when he assured that Brexit would work and said that the Labour Party should accept the results of 2016? Now he's going to sing a completely different song, and it's amazing. Let's look into this in more detail. Starmer was caught flirting with the EU, and this is not just a friendly conversation. His spokesman is trying to reassure everyone, arguing that their deal with the EU will not violate any borders. But we've heard that before, haven't we?
At the weekend, I took a microphone and a camera to a high street, and I spoke to a load of pensioners that, you know, some voted Labour, some didn't. But the anger out there is so high. They cannot believe what this government is doing. The optics is terrible. They are living the high life. Keir Starmer has had more freebies than any other MP over the last 5 years. I mean, after what he said in interviews and in Parliament. This is the biggest hypocrite in politics. It's such a bad look, and they are so out of touch with the normal people of this country. And I would have thought they would have given it a year or so, before they decided to act like this. But it's after weeks. They've got no shame.
The problem is that no one knows what is really going on behind closed doors, and this causes deep concern among people. Critics accuse Starmer of succumbing to pressure from Brussels. Can you blame them for that? One minute he was showing respect for Brexit, and the next he's acting like the EU's best friend. It's not just the usual critics who are annoyed. Starmer has his own deputies who summon him for questioning, and this creates an atmosphere of tension. Some, such as Stella Crees, advocate joining PEM, arguing that it will help British business. But other Labour MPs are furious, seeing this as the beginning of a serious compromise on Brexit, and their anger is only growing. See ya!